The third important trend that's happening is the size of the infrastructure gap that Africa faces and the huge efforts that are taking place to close it, which creates in itself a large number of business opportunities for players in this sector. So again, the data in this space, I remember trying to pull it together in the first report about 8 years ago or so. But so we were spending about $40 to $50 billion on infrastructure spend, about 10 years ago in Africa. That number is now about 80 billion. So in a very short space of time, the infrastructure spend has more than doubled. And that is extremely important or necessary in a continent where on all the metrics we lag the BRIC countries. So whether you're talking about energy consumption per capita, rail density or road density, we lag all the comparable regions of the world. But even at that level of expenditure, we're nowhere near, right? We still think we should be spending something like 150 billion, so double again of what we're spending today to close the infrastructure gap anytime in the near future. Of course, you have initiatives by the donor community, the African Development Bank, attempts at public-private partnerships, various efforts. I think what is probably newly emerging on the scene is more small-scale and innovative players like you've heard of Mkopa in Kenya, which has provided electricity and the financing to support that to about 600,000 households in East Africa. A small dent in the 600 million households that are looking for, or 600 million people, let me say, that are looking for electricity in Africa. But some of these small innovations will complement some of the bigger efforts. But again, infrastructure and the big push, an important trend across the continent.
Resources, we can't talk about the continent without talking about resources, right? And so we spend a lot of time, again, looking at what we're doing on the resources front. And we have to be honest with each other. This is one where we've actually under-delivered as Africa, right? So we've really not been able to use the resources to benefit our people. But again, things are changing, right? So we looked at agriculture, we looked at oil and gas, we looked at mining. If you take ag, a lot of work is going in now. Governments and the private sector are doing this to help transform the ag sector. 70% of Africans' population works in the agriculture sector. The big issue is yields. Yields tend to be very, very low. But you start to see a number of players who are innovating in that space. So in the book, we talk about this company called Baban Gonan, who was started by a Nigerian, Kola Masha, who's working in northern Nigeria. He's so far, over the last couple of years, worked with 20,000 smallholder farmers. He provides them with inputs, right, on fertilizers and some of the seeds they need. He guarantees the offtake and then unsells it. What has happened since then is they've been able to double the yields. The income has increased 3.5x, which is very important for these farmers. And he's looking to scale that to 1 million farmers over the next few years, right? So you see a number of these players grow intelligence that Chironga started is using more data analytics in the agriculture space. So a lot of technology that's being used to help transform the ag sector and make sure that it's the breadbasket of the world, given that, as we know, 60% of the unused arable land today globally sits in Africa. If you take oil and gas, again, same thing there. We have a number of these countries, that have oil reserves and that are producing, but have not really used it to the benefit of the countries. You take Nigeria, right? What's very interesting for Nigeria is that oil today, as big as it is for the economy, only accounts for less than 10% of the economy. So they've actually been able to diversify the economy quite well, but oil is still about 40% of government revenues, right? So what they're struggling is actually how do you monetize the rest of the economy, right? So that's what they're struggling with. But oil is quite important. We spend time on oil and gas, and we have on the gas side, we know a lot of the reserves globally. We spent time with the CEO of ENI, right, which is one of the big majors out of Italy, who's very present in Africa. And he told us, look, Africa holds 15% of the world's gas reserves, but only produces 4% of the world's energy, right? And back to Mutsa's point around the big energy gap. And so what they're pushing for and what we see more governments pushing for is how do you use this gas to power energy for our countries, right? And that's what ENI is looking to stand for. You look at mining, right? And you see it in this country as well. We actually just published a report on mining in South Africa last week. That came out last week during the Indaba. And again, there, across many commodities, we have the largest reserves in the world, right? Diamond, cobalt, manganese, and so on. But again, there we've not done a good job of leveraging these resources for the benefit of our countries. So on the resources front, again, here we see when you take a glass half full lens, we see a lot of work being done primarily by government and the private sector to try to unlock the potential here and make sure it's used for the benefit of the citizens.
The last one, which certainly became a very big theme of the work we were doing at McKinsey with companies the last 4 or 5 years or so, was just like the rapid adoption of digital technologies and innovation across the African continent. I think the first time the world really took notice of Africa as maybe an innovation leader was in the mobile money space, where Africa quickly emerged to be the #1 player in mobile money. So today, over half of all mobile money accounts are in Africa. And that's building off, this 700 million or so mobile phone connections on the continent. About close to half of them are smartphones. So beyond mobile money, we're starting to see applications now in e-commerce with the likes of Jumia, which is becoming an increasingly successful player in e-commerce across the continent. We're seeing innovations in other areas. In healthcare, drone delivery of medicines has become a reality. We're seeing new ways of using technology to provide education remotely at higher quality to more people. So we're seeing beyond financial services, where I think was the first kind of spike, into areas like healthcare, e-commerce, education, innovations that are creating plentiful business opportunities across the continent. So these are the 5 big trends that we discuss in the book that we think are shaping really the business landscape and the business opportunities in Africa.